Cool.
Okay, we should be in webinar mode. Great, I can see some participants as well. Cool, we can give another minute or so for people to join. But how are you doing anyway, Francesca?
I'm good, thanks. One of those days where just insanely busy, but very excited for this session.
Awesome. Yeah, me too. I'm just covering for Julia today. I was coordinating the summer program, so I'm just stepping in. So it's nice to be back.
Nice. I'm actually a personal friend of Julia's.
Oh right, okay, nice.
I'm a big fan. And thinks what she's running is amazing.
Yeah, it's a really great program, a great opportunity.
Definitely. And I've met some pretty great people who I'm mentoring at the moment, so that's been nice.
Okay, good stuff. Okay, just checking attendees. I think it's stabilized. So yeah, we can get going. Yeah, welcome everyone to this session on interview prep. Super fortunate to have Tunde and Francesca join us today. They're going to tell us about their experiences. They've got a presentation planned, and then apparently it's going to be more of like a workshop format. So if you've got questions, put them in the Q&A function, or just raise your hand or do some kind of reaction, and I can unmute you and you can ask it as well. But without further ado, I'll let you two take it from here.
Cool. Tunde, do you want to share your screen?
Yeah, I'm in the process of doing that right now. Give me a little second. I think the screen sharing is currently disabled, so we need to maybe enable that. But maybe we can introduce ourselves. I've got on mute. Maybe we can introduce. What were we on mute for? Did you hear anything I said?
Well, I not the last 30 seconds, but I think maybe intros are required before we can smoothly transition into the presentation.
There we are. So basically, I was saying that screen sharing was essentially disabled, and like I was like, we should do intros while we wait for it to be undisabled, but it's now become undisabled. So I think we're good. So that was nice and embarrassing, but we can do intros. So, Francesca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So maybe onto the first slide, and then we can do a bit of story time of how we actually ended up meeting. So yes, my name is Francesca. I'm currently an associate at Project A, which is a German VC headquartered in Berlin, but we also have offices in London. In terms of my background, I'm actually a biologist by degree, but then decided to jump into the startup world where I headed up operations at an e-commerce startup, saw that rise and fall, so plenty of learnings to take away from that. And then I decided I wanted to get into VC. And what I was told at the time was that I didn't have the right network. I hadn't had 4 years, 5 years in a top consulting firm or a bank, and so I should go away and not even try to get into VC. Thankfully, I'm quite a stubborn person, and so I ignored that advice and actually, fortunately, ended up working as an intern at Playfair Capital, a generalist pre-seed fund headquartered in London. And then subsequently after that internship, I landed a role at True, which is a private equity firm that also has a VC arm, that also has a consulting firm, arm, which I worked on. And whilst I was there, I started a podcast called Associated, which was all about making VC more accessible. And that's actually how I ended up getting the role at Project A. And Associated is also where I met Tunde, but Tunde, perhaps before you tell that story, you can jump into your experience today.
Yeah, so I started off on a much darker path. So studied law for my sins, and I was obviously very deeply sinful in a previous life. So after that, went straight to do investment banking for 3 years, covering telecom, media, and tech companies. And that was back in London, and I grew up in London. And about a year and a half into that, I decided that like I didn't really like late stage, because we were covering all of these like, well, I guess telecom companies, which are all extremely mature, but then like late stage tech. And I kind of looked at all these companies and I was like, I wish I saw them earlier. So decided I wanted to get into VC. So I tried to do that. The market said no consistently for a while. And so decided to kind of change tack. So moved to Berlin to work for an agricultural tech startup there, called Infarm. Joined right after the Series A. Was in the strategy team there, and helped that company grow from 1 to 10 cities, and then go on to like raise $100 million in their Series B, and was like pretty instrumental in that raise. Still kind of had the VC bug that whole time. So after about 14 months there, applied to do the Future VC internship, and was part of the first cohort, which is, I guess, my connection with this. And I was placed at Local Globe. So that was when it was in person. So before the debacle that we're all in right now. And then, spent 5 weeks at Local Globe, really caught the VC bug. So decided to try and get in full time. Spent a bit longer doing that than I would have liked. So ended up doing an internship at Creandum, which was 6 months, which took me to Stockholm, which is where I now live. Did that internship. And then at the end of that, basically found a full-time role at Icebreaker, which is, I guess, a pre-seed fund headquartered in Helsinki, but with offices in Stockholm and Tallinn also. Where I've been working for the last year. I guess that kind of both of our, let's call them, winding journeys is one of the motivations for like this the content that we've put out. So we made like a 4-part mini series on basically unpacking what happens in venture interviews, because I guess between the two of us, we would consider ourselves an authority on all of the bad things that can happen to you and all of the good things that can happen to you when you get interviewed by venture funds. And also maybe another piece of content, which is at the end, is like my little sub-story blog post about how I got into VC, which Francesca read and contacted me off the back of. So,
yeah, and actually, true story, guys. So, and girls, Tunde ignored my LinkedIn request. And so I, being the stubborn person that I am, when I want to contact someone, reached out to Julia and said, Julia, you know Tunde because I know he attended the Future VC. So can you make the introduction? And so that's actually how we ended up meeting. And I had this idea of this 4-part series, having just got off the back of a number of interviews for the VC, for VC positions, and I could totally relate to Tunde's blog, and I thought, hey, he's probably going to be the best person for me to do this with. So that's Jesus, you remember the blog post? Amazing. So yes, exactly. And so that's how we started Associated. Working together Associated, and I'm delighted to say that now Tunde is a full-time member of the team and has been working on season 6 with us. So that's been fantastic. That the journey has resulted in it continuing. And so in terms of how we were planning on running this session, is that we're going to do a quick run through of the questions that we cover on this 4-part series and how we've sectioned them off for various reasons. But what we would really like to do is get your involvement of what questions we potentially have missed. And I think we don't have that long, and each episode we did on the 4-part series is about an hour, so we won't be able to cover all the questions, but perhaps one or two that you'd quite like us to chat about from the list you can pick, and we can have a quick chat, and then as a group, we can kind of add a few more there. Hope that works for everyone. So without further ado, should we jump to the first topic? Can you move that sticker now, or do you have to go on the yeah, might have to do it like that, but hopefully everyone can still see it. So I covered it up just because we probably would just discuss sort of fun specifics. And Tindy, what do we mean by fun specifics, would you say? You're on mute.
I'm on mute still. Yeah, so I mean, fun specific. So I guess maybe just an overview. We kind of categorize everything into 4 parts. So there are like fun specifics, kind of personal questions, case studies, and company evaluation. And then you have the bit at the end where the person interviewing you that you want a job from asks you if you have any questions for them. And, you know, when can I start isn't a good answer. So so fun specifics are basically, it's about knowing or proving to the person interviewing you that you know what they do, what they're interested in, and that your interests are, you know, aligned with, you know, whatever that fund's kind of niche is, as well as also proving that you understand generally a bit about the sector. So yeah, that's kind of fun specifics as a category.
Nice. So without further ado, is there any questions there that you'd specifically like us to discuss, and maybe say how we would answer that question?
Maybe you can use the number as well.
So feel free to pop it in the chat or voice. 3. All right, Tindy, number 3.
Okay, all right, you're doing the next 3. Yeah, imagine we were a company that you want to invest in, convince us to take your money. Okay, so this is actually quite a good question, and one that I, you know, when I first started interviewing would throw me. One of the things which maybe you've learned from the other sessions, that VC is very much, at least in this market, also a sales game. So, you know, the rule of thumb, it's not always true, is that the hot startups are, you know, don't have to do this, but then you potentially don't really want to invest in them. But the name of this game, this question involves kind of 2 parts. So part 1 is you need to have a strong understanding of the things which make the fund that you're applying to unique. So if I was to talk about Icebreaker, we are a pre-seed fund. We're very locally focused. So we only invest in free markets, Finland, Sweden, Estonia. We have this kind of Icebreaker community, which we use to support people at the very earliest stages of entrepreneurship. And we also use it to kind of connect our founders with talent in those local ecosystems. And we also kind of engage in what we would call in relatively hands-on portfolio support. So we have bi-weekly sessions with all of the companies that we're invested in, rather than other funds which maybe are more likely to have, you know, quarterly or even sometimes biannual types of interactions. So I mean, you know, that was maybe a short example of an answer, but the idea here is to really kind of prove that you know what makes, you know, fund X that you're applying to unique. And a good way to kind of find this out is by, you know, going to their website, looking. VCs love to talk, so, you know, they normally will have blogs. Normally when they announce like a new fund, which they have to kind of do normally like every 3 to 4 years, they'll have a little kind of media piece where they talk about, you know, why their fund is, you know, really unique and special. So kind of trying to lift the things that they say there. And also, you know, looking at kind of podcasts and how they describe themselves in podcasts and position themselves, and basically kind of taking all of that content in, and essentially regurgitating that, because, you know, those things that they say online are what they think is unique about themselves. So on top of that, you can obviously also mention kind of historical successes, if the fund that you're applying to has been successful in the past. So, if Fund A was invested in I don't know, let's say Stripe, then you can say, yeah, we have a good track record of investments, including Stripe. But I think going for the really kind of going for an approach which proves that you did your research about the fund and could pitch it is your best kind of bet here.
Yeah, definitely. Pull out the USPs of that fund and regurgitate it back to them is basically what they're looking for. And just quickly, like over to the rest of you, is there anything we've missed there? Have you, from your own experiences, had a question asked that's about fund specific? Just turned off the light. Fund specifics, or indeed, can you think of any potential questions that a fund might ask in relation to their business? Can anyone think of anything before we move on? Oh, there's one, but I can't read it. I need to enlarge that.
Who are their competitors, it says?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely something they would come up with, and that again is kind of linked to like what would make them unique, what would make them sort of carve out the niche, what maybe they should exaggerate over the competitors. So that's a really, really great question. Is the stage that the company is at very important here? Jemima, yes, is the short answer. So if they're asking what company should they invest in, you should definitely not pitch a company that's not within their investment remit or range, because that basically has demonstrated that you don't understand their ticket size and at what point they invest in the company. If you're asking like what companies you'd invest in, which one you wouldn't invest in terms of their portfolio company, then it doesn't matter what stage they are. Obviously have a double check of when they last raised their round, for example, how well they're doing. That's obviously a good indication of like how often they're in the news, if they've announced a new round. So it really depends on the question, but every single time stage is important, and your knowledge of where they're sitting and the age of the company and when they last raised, what they do is incredibly important. But great point, Tunde, we should add who are your competitors, who do you think are our competitors to that list for sure?
Yeah, although more and more the kind of seems like everyone is everyone's competitor.
Yeah,
but maybe just before this slide, I think in terms of how you prepare for these types of questions, I think the homework that you need to do before an interview is like, what makes this fund unique, which is that whole kind of process that I outlined earlier, which is like literally sifting through the material that they kind of put out. And again, VCs love to talk and figuring out, okay, how do they position themselves and being able to say that back. Next is like having at least some kind of understanding of their portfolio. Going on, their website, they often have portfolio lists or lists of portfolio companies, or maybe Crunchbase, and seeing, at least what they've recently invested in. But like the more you know, the better. So they begin to answer questions about which companies you find interesting, what you like that they've done. And the last part is just also beginning to like show that you can begin to do like an investment job. At least I would rarely go into an interview without identifying at least one company that I think I could say they should invest in, or they should at least look at. And that's also, that links with the kind of first job, which is researching the fund, because it proves two things. It proves that, one, you have like a kind of investor's mindset, but the second thing is it proves that you have understood what they do, and then can like actually match appropriate companies to that.
I had a couple of questions as well, if we've got any time.
Yeah, shoot.
Oh, sure. So the first one is a question you might get in other interview processes on, like, what other VCs are you applying to? I'm just curious if that's ever come up and how you would handle that question.
Yeah, I mean, normally, I actually never got that question, but as someone who has actually interviewed people for roles now, if I asked that, I would either say, if I was being safe, I'd say I'm not comfortable disclosing that right now. The other way you could also answer that is like, make sure that the other funds you are applying to are at least of a similar stage or of a similar focus. Because like if you say, okay, yeah, you're applying for a seed fund and then you're applying for like some kind of mega cap growth fund, then there maybe are questions about whether you just kind of want to be in the industry generally, or, you know, I think, yeah, that kind of stage alignment is a question.
I would also be quite honest about it, because people talk. So if you aren't discussing, interviewing with another fund or in a later stage, don't say that you are. But if you are, definitely say you are, second, third round with another fund, but then always spin it to say, but I'm particularly interested in your fund because I can really relate to your thesis. So make sure like you flatter their ego in the process, but make sure that they are aware that you are in demand.
Right, exactly. So segue into sort of question 2.
Yeah, exactly. And another question?
Yeah, there was one more I had. Let me check the Q&A. Okay, one more had come through as well. So yeah, okay. I suppose you could do Bola's question, then I can ask my last one.
Sorry, I need to get it up now. I'm using 2 different screens. Okay, so one question I anticipated was portfolio support, and how would I be able to add value there with an operations background in a big tech? Yeah, no, I think anonymous attendee, that is absolutely something that you should say, is that you have experience in operations, and that's something that you're going to be bringing to the table, and give a nice little case study of how you did that. And I think that is so important. Is if you think about a company team, as a VC is a group of individuals, and collectively they are the best in the business for making a decision on whether to invest or not, and supporting that company to the next steps in terms of stages. And there's so many other ways that you can bring value, but certainly with the operations, make sure you come with a case study. You can offer your network of, in a specific niche, a network of people that can help give advice to that individual, a network of other VCs for the next level of funding. So have a look, and this is a big tip, of everyone in the team, and look at their skills and expertise, and how can you carve yourself a little pocket, a little niche, in terms of not only like supporting the portfolio companies, but also identifying new businesses, etc. So yeah, that's it's really important that definitely anticipate that portfolio support if that's in your job remit. So that's important also to understand that at Project A, for example, we have over 100 people that are part of the operations team. So I don't do a lot of portfolio support, to be candid. The thing that I offer in terms of portfolio support is introductions to other VCs, which I've been able to grasp from my associated times of interviewing loads of different VCs. So I come with a suite of people that can invest in our portfolio companies to the next level. So just be conscious of that. Tunde, do you want to answer the second question?
Yeah, to answer the second question, which is, do you have these questions at the first stage? i.e. the introductory call, or like, you know, what stage you get these questions at, wherever and whenever. Like interview processes are like one of the least standardized things that you'll ever kind of encounter. Like a lot of people are literally making it up, which is why maybe they're like, funds typically don't interview that frequently. So they have like a lot of, let's call it leeway or remit to like design their own processes. And so, yeah, literally at any stage, typically this would be in the first interview. If there is like a case study interview, then normally they won't ask you about fund specifics, unless it's like the type of case study where they're like, can you please, you know, find and describe a company that we should invest in. And then if it's, and then kind of after that, if you're doing the kind of like final stages, and you're kind of doing more or less a meet and greet with all of the other people in the fund, which happens towards the end of these processes, then often it is kind of the same. You get a lot of the same questions. So these can just kind of keep coming back. It would just be maybe different people asking you the same thing.
Mm. And just quickly, that point number one, how do VC firms work? I cannot emphasize enough how important that is to understand how a VC business model works, because I've explained it to a lot of people who are curious about wanting to work in VC and love the idea of it. But the minute I tell them how it works and how carry works, etc., it completely puts them off. So we do cover it pretty well, I'd say, in our 4-part series. So yeah, make sure you have that understanding, because it will determine, when you apply for a fund, the potential to grow within that company and to climb up the ranks, because a lot of the time in VC, that is not an option at all. So yeah, very important question number one, even if it isn't asked in the interview process. Did we have a final question before we moved on?
I think, I mean, the questions are kind of from you know, like later stages, for other parts of the presentation. So I guess we're going to cover some of this, especially like the case study question. To answer Tej's question really quickly, I think if you're going to kind of, with regards to portfolio support, I think it really depends on the role and the type of fund. Like often it's, if you're going for like an investing role, then, or like the job description will often have a skew as to like how much investing you're going to be doing, how much support you're going to be doing. So, you know, I don't think it really is a function of how old a fund is, whether they do portfolio support. Some funds don't do any portfolio work. Some funds do a lot. Some funds do a bit at the beginning and stop doing it. So it's very specific to the fund. I don't think like the age of the fund is a proxy. And sometimes the stage of the fund is a proxy, but then there are, you know, seed funds that do nothing, and seed funds and like Series C funds that do everything. So yeah, no real answer to that one. There's no kind of rule.
Well, it's not portfolio support. The age matters because often when a fund raises a new fund, they're hiring. So that's what you really should look after, and they've got fresh capital to deploy. If a fund is 3-4 years old and there's no sign of them raising a new fund because their performance of their choice of startups they've invested in hasn't performed very well, then there's no point reaching out to them, because they're probably not necessarily gonna be able to raise a new fund from LPs. So yeah, that's when age is important, I'd say, more so than portfolio support, because it just depends on the fund's thesis.
Cool. Maybe we can move on to the next slide, because I guess we're eating through time here. So I would say like a similar process for this one. It would be great to kind of hear, well, actually, I guess there already is a question about case studies, but it would be great to kind of get which question you guys think would be most interesting to have answered. Metrics.
Should I take this one?
Yeah, I guess we can both take it, and you
Yeah.
can start there.
Yeah. So as always, where you fall, got it. So metrics is important, but I think it does depend from fund to fund which fund highlights what. From project A perspective, from both like a B2B and a B2C, and anything and everything in between, we look at growth rates, and that really does depend on what kind of growth rates we look at, depending on what the business does. So if it's well, let's just write down the basic things. So let's take a skincare company, something we've been looking at the moment, which is in essence D2C, direct to consumer. What we're looking at here is the growth of subscriptions month on month. What we get very excited about is anything above 10%. We are super excited about anything that does that at that scale. But then we'll get into a little bit more about the unit economics. But we were also looking at acquisition costs, so making sure that acquisition costs stay relatively level, but the growth keeps staying consistent. And then another thing that we really look at is churn rate. So for however many people that are signing up each month, how many are dropping off and why? And again, this is a general metric, but what's for a direct to consumer brand, a very healthy stat is that over a course of a year, like 30% of the cohort, so the people that have signed up a year ago are still on the platform. Like that is a very, very good metric, because people are fickle, right? They often just drop off. So the higher the less people that have churned within 12 months, the better the product is. So to summarize, you look at the growth rates in terms of adoption on a month-on-month basis, and you look at how many people are churning on a month-on-month basis, and making sure that everything is a plus sign. And then maybe it will turn into like SaaS, B2B company. So you expect in general churn rates to be a lot lower in general, because if you're a business, it's just a real faff to cancel subscriptions and find a new tool. So you expect the churn rates to be a lot lower, but in terms of the customer acquisition cost, they're typically much higher, because the subscription fee is generally much higher. If you're a B2B business, you're not going to typically offer your product for 30 quid a month. It's going to be a lot higher than that. So again, it's that balance of growth rate and churn, and the cost of acquiring that customer, and looking at the balance. And that's where you get this ratio, which is CAC to LTV. And maybe Tunde, you can jump onto what that ratio should look like.
Yeah. So in terms of like what that ratio should look like, typically, a good number would be like 3 to 1. I was going to say best in class, but basically anything higher than 3 to 1 is great. And then another thing, and that basically means that your cost, the value of the customer, which I mean, there's tons of blog posts online about how exactly you calculate the lifetime value of a customer, is 3 times higher than the cost of acquiring a new user. So like 3 to 1 is like normally what you would plug for, and you would say, okay, that's a good company. But obviously, no one is complaining if it's 100 to 1. I think you're laughing. So
well, then you should be spending more money on acquiring them, right? In general.
Yes, if you can, if you can, yeah, that's always the catch-22. But I think maybe to even take a step out of it, one way to think of this is to think about like, the business priorities or like the business goals of like a venture-backed startup. So one is to kind of grow very quickly, right? And that is, that's basically a function of, the growth rate, but it's also a function of the churn, because if you lose every customer that you gain, then actually normally you're just kind of standing still. So that's where kind of growth and churn come in. And also churn is, or having low churn, so having a low number of people who leave is quite a good indicator of like utility or some value being provided by your software, or whatever it is you're selling or your product. Then there is kind of like, there are measures of kind of profitability. So I think VCs are at least quite interested in the gross profit, right? So the rest, so like kind of, and gross profit is revenue minus like costs of goods sold. So the idea is often that a lot of these modern businesses, it's relatively cheap to actually provide the service that they're providing. And so as long as that, like a best-in-class cost of goods sold would be, somewhere between 80 and 90%. And so it means that you can kind of make a lot of money in the long term, because the belief is that, the general belief is that cost of goods sold normally don't really change much, but the kind of overarching costs of running a business and like, the marketing operations, etc., can get more efficient over time with scale. So you kind of need to think about that. And then, the other thing is like that people look at, which is that kind of CAC to LTV calculation, is can you acquire customers, firstly quickly and scalably, but also cheap enough for like the business logic to make sense. So if you're paying, £20 to earn two pounds, you're an idiot. So like the VCs need to sorry, but the VCs need to kind of believe that there is a way to kind of actually, buy users or acquire users, whether that's through placing ads or paying for, sales teams to go to fancy dinners and fly to strange countries. That there's a way to like acquire users profitably, and that kind of logic will be relevant from the kind of I would say around the late seed and Series A onwards. And where I exist in the market, we don't have any numbers. So or you have very early numbers, and often you can't read that much into them. But what you'll find is, as the later you go, the more let's call it numerically centered investors become. Another metric, which will make you sound smart and is more and more important increasingly, is this metric called like net revenue retention, which is basically a kind of way of a kind of more sophisticated way of looking at churn. So it says, instead of looking at churn on an absolute basis, so looking at like a company and saying we have 10 users and it became 9 users, you look at actually how much those users spend. So if you have $100 worth of usage and across 10 users, and that becomes $80 worth of usage across 10 users, that means those customers downsized, which is still churn. They've just reduced their subscription, even though they haven't canceled. Whereas if you have that $100 across 10 users go up to like $130 or $140, then that shows that the customers are expanding their kind of operations with you, or at least you have the ability to charge them more, which is normally a really good indicator that like the business will grow and continue to generate value. And like a best in class like net revenue retention metric is actually 130, 140%. And so like all of the like great public companies that you see, which people love and talk about, normally have quite good like net revenue retention. So a user ends up spending more money over time. Jemima asked a question about business models and materials, and which is a helpful and good overall summary. I mean, I would listen to the podcast. I think there are different kind of models which all have different metrics associated with them. I mean, Point9 has some very good information on like what good like SaaS metrics look like at the seed and the Series A. One of the problems, and I think also maybe up to the Series B, one of the problems is these actually like evolve every year. So like the market standards are kind of, consistently changing, which makes it quite hard to pin down. And also like from business model to business model, they also change. And I don't necessarily think that it's a mature thing to do, to have like a very kind of, let's call it rigid, kind of box checking exercise for these metrics, right? Because like, say you focus on a company must have, X, Y, Z annual recurring revenue, let's say 1 million annual recurring revenue to raise a Series A, which is like a metric people commonly tout. Does that mean you reject something which is growing 500% month on month and is at 800? Probably not. And so I think it makes sense to take a kind of more holistic view towards all of this stuff.
Yeah, I would totally agree. And just to sort of add to that, so good resource, it's Todd Grover's episode on Associated from Will. He explains it really well, what he looks for, and that's a growth stage fund. So he far more eloquently than I did, he explained it. In terms of just looking at a company in general, Speed Invest did a very interesting scorecard that they used to evaluate marketplace models. And I really found that very useful when I was writing case studies of how to lay out a business. And in terms of what I would do, just as a good exercise for myself, is pick 3 different kinds of business model and a startup that you like look of, and make sure that they show you quite clearly their pricing. And then start working in, okay, this is how much they charge their customer each month. How much would it be reasonable to spend to acquire those said customers? How long would it make sense for them to have the lifetime value of that customer for, in order to have a healthy business? And as an exercise, you can start building up your own thesis of what good might look like, and what you'd find impressive, what would you find normal, and it gives you an opportunity to sort of stretch your mind of what might good look like, and get creative. Okay, if it's 50 euros, that would look quite good. What would be the best acquisition channels? How could they be creative and drop that low? Could they put in a referral scheme in, etc.? So yeah, that would be something that I would recommend. Cool. Are we jumping to a thingy? Oh no, we're doing something else. We're kind of running out of time a little bit, but does anyone have any sort of additional things that we've missed on the case study questions that you feel like should be added? Otherwise, we can just zoom on to the next one.
Yeah, it might make sense to get through the slides and then we can do general Q&A after, so that we get to see all of the different parts.
Cool. Personal questions. I think this was our favorite episode to record, wasn't it, Tunde?
Yeah, this was very intimate. Oh no. Yeah, I mean, this maybe I would just like go through the kind of general approach here. I guess this is the one where you're most free, so I can give, in a sense, the least advice. Advice here. But I guess one of the things you want to do is you want to kind of stand out. What often happens in VC roles is that, literally 1,000 people apply. No word of a lie there. So all of your little kind of quirks and uniquenesses and idiosyncrasies, you should, maybe don't let the strangest of them blossom, but the ones which are medium strange, let those blossom in this process. And then, there is a kind of another vein of like personal questions, which are kind of about, how you think about investing, trying to unpack that, why you think you're going to good. And then also maybe how you're going to interact on a fund level. So funds are very interested about how you fit into the team. A lot of funds are extremely small, like my fund is. I think there are 9 people in the deal team at Icebreaker, right? Which means that, you know, the individual personalities in those conversations on like are maybe relatively important. So funds are quite sensitive to that. We don't have as many people as Project A, unfortunately, but you know, proving that you kind of simultaneously play well with others, but also are capable of like getting your point of view across, conveying your message, etc., is very important. I think, yeah, I think also just proving that you're kind of an ambitious person and just like trying to set yourself apart is generally important. And then maybe the kind of second part of this is also just showing that you maybe have some opinions about certain areas. So whether that's, you know, a type of deal that you want to do, or a type of company or interest area that you have, or maybe like a type of personal project that you would intend to bring to bear at, you know, whichever VC fund decides to accept you finally. Like having those types of things really help there.
Yeah. Does anyone have any specific questions you want us to answer? Otherwise, we can maybe. What would you like to see yourself accomplish? Yeah, I hate those questions as well. So when someone, this is top tip that I sussed out from like, where do you want to be in 5 years? I think you can be like, that is a super interesting question, but I would say what I really want to focus on is what I want to achieve in the next 6 months. When I joined a fund, and these are the following, and most people don't tend to go, yeah, but what in 5 years time? They go, oh, okay, she's very conscientious of what she wants to achieve now. And in answer to that question, again, it's all about knowing the fund. So if you say, I want to be super hands-on with the portfolio company, and that fund does very minimal portfolio support, or indeed they have a separate team for that, then it obviously doesn't land very well. If you say, I would want to reach out and build my own network of VCs, and it's clear that the partners bring in the deal flow, then like, again, that's not relevant. So try and tie in your ambitions to what the fund expects your role to be. And I would always try and make sure that it's linked to collaboration. So instead of saying, I want to source my own deal and, like secure it, I would rather go for, I would like to support on 5 deals that go through to finally investing in it. So those nuances of support, being a team member, getting involved, you'd like to add a process to improve whatever, and you have a few ideas. So I think when you say what you want to accomplish, layer on what you like. First, write down what you actually want to accomplish, and then make sure that those are malleable to the needs and wants of that fund based on the conversations you've been having with them, because that's not going to be the first question, and you'll have hopefully time to ask and figure out what your role and responsibility might be. Any other questions before we jump to the final part of the 4-part series of questions that we tend to cover? Who is someone you fear but respect?
I don't think we can answer that for
my
you.
mother.
Yeah.
And I don't think you should be afraid of bringing in your humor here, right? That may be harder to do on an application form. But again, be medium quirky, I'd say, Tinley, right? Say something interesting, not something too vanilla. And yeah, I would think like what would be your first reaction, have a think of whether that's too much, and then Put some time and energy into answering those questions and make sure it isn't too dull, but not too out there, I'd say. Not that helpful, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can help, because I guess like one of the things is your answer should be true. So like, I mean, I could give you like an abstract answer, which would maybe tick all the boxes, but may turn out that you don't fear or respect that person. So yeah. Anyway, I think maybe it makes sense to move to the last section.
Yeah. Oh, let's move down. Oh well. The question game, very, very, very important section here where you can really claw back some brownie points, because this is where you can show that you've done your homework. You have also a chance to get a feeling of whether this is a fund that you want to work for, quite honestly. And so I think it's often really hard to go in after an interview and then they've grilled you for a good hour. Actually, my longest ever interview process, fun fact, was 3.5 hours long. And you really don't feel like you want to ask any questions. But it's so important to come up with a list beforehand, or indeed think of some during the course of this interview to ask, because it's a demonstration of you putting the effort in, and you also a chance to figure out whether you want to work there. So is there any questions specifically that you'd like to ask, like why we would ask them, or indeed how you think a fund should answer them?
I think number 6 about reserve policy, that would be interesting.
Tunde, over to you.
Yeah, I'm not sure if in the sessions you kind of already gone over what a reserve policy is. Maybe if someone could say, and then I could, so I don't have to mansplain that. Okay, all right. So a reserve policy is basically what most venture funds will have. If you raise $100 million fund, then you will normally reserve a portion of it. Industry like average is like 50% for follow-on investments. So say I have $100 million fund, I basically will set aside 50 million of it for like the initial check, so like the first investments in companies, and then I'll keep the remaining 50 million or whatever the reserve percentage is to continue to like back those same companies going forward as they raise future rounds. This is the same reason why funds also try and reserve pro rata rights when they make investments, so they can continue to deploy capital, and the capital that they're continuing to deploy are, what are called their reserves. Now, some funds have different reserve policies, which are normally indicative of their strategies. So if you have some funds are literally like 100%, it's pretty rare now, but like 100% first check. So they will literally put all of the money that they're ever going to invest in a company across its life cycle in upfront and try and get as much ownership there and then. Some funds reserve a ton of money, like, I think I'm not allowed to say. Icebreaker reserves a lot, let's say that. So we reserve like a decent portion of the fund to follow on. And that means that, we are looking, for example, to continue to back the entrepreneurs in subsequent rounds, and to have like the ability to do that for maybe 2, 3, 4 more rounds afterwards. So I think, reserve policy tells you a lot about maybe how the fund thinks about the future, and maybe thinks about like, how it wants to, build/defend ownership. The other good thing about, asking this is that it kind of tacitly signals that a bit more about like than the surface level about, the structure of venture funds and how the model works. Because, you could probably read thousands of blog posts and articles by VCs, and it's pretty rare for them to talk about reserves, even though they all do it. So it does kind of position you to sound like an insider.
Awesome. That's really helpful. I mean, any other questions, guys, feel free to drop them in. I think there was one that that was a bit earlier we didn't pick up, and that's about case studies. So if you have a formal case study round, maybe you give a brief, or you have to take something home and prepare a deck over a couple of days. Any insights on that stage?
Yeah,
I mean,
sorry.
You go.
As I said, the marketplace scorecard from Speed Invest, I would really use that as a framework, or indeed look at what the fund, as you said, they talk a lot. So look at if they've written something along the lines of what do we look for, what is our thesis, and basically copy how they analyze businesses as the structure for your case study. And I think it really doesn't matter if you put it on a PowerPoint, you put it on a one-pager. Just make sure that your framework is likely to be in line with what the fund does, and maybe add an additional quirk. So, for example, if they don't put in how we evaluate our company, they don't add why or the value add that this fund could bring, add that, for example. So you bring your extra twist to it. Or, you know, like how you would support the company if you were a member of that team. So just make sure you add that extra little sparkle to your case study, but make sure it's really in line with like the thesis of the fund and what they look for. One thing that I didn't add in, which I was kind of shocked that I needed to do in the first place, is the valuation, how much I would put into that company and for what equity. And we do talk quite a lot about valuation in this 4-part series and how you go about doing that. There's no right or wrong answer, and there's quite a lot of content online of how you would value your business. But again, that's what they were expecting of me, which I didn't do, which may be something to take into consideration. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. That was just quite specific from that fund. But just be aware they might ask you, okay, you've picked this company or you evaluated this company, but like, would you invest in it or not? And then the answer is never yes or no necessarily. It's yes at this price, because or indeed no, but just make sure you have a valid answer. But if the answer is yes, say at this price, not yes, full stop, for whatever money. Like be aware that there's always going to be a ceiling. And be like conscious of like the last couple of investments they've made, how big was that investment into that company. That should give you a good indication of like how old that company is, like how big they're willing to go for that little equity. Yeah.
And in terms of like early stage valuations, just going to give you some tips so you can do them. So like up to the A, maybe even up to the B, like literally easiest rule of thumb is like divide the amount of money that the company is raising by the ownership target of the fund that you have, and you'll get the valuation, because I mean that's what people are actually just doing. Yeah. Right. So because I mean early stage valuations, they don't necessarily make
any sense.
Then they're not scientific. Let's say that they don't. So they're more based on like the only thing that they're really. And then if you just into ownership targets, unless if the fund is like leading rounds at the seed or Series A stage, they're probably aiming for like 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
And then at the B, it might be 10 to 15%. And then, you know, growth funds is a whole different kettle of fish. Yeah. But like, and in the ground, you can actually begin to do the fun valuation methods that I used to do when I was an investment banker. So that is a whole different science and a lot more painful and time consuming than simple division. So I won't go into that here. But for the early stage, basically I'm normally going, they want 2 million pounds, and we are a seed fund. So what is 2 million divided by 20? that's, or 20%, that's 10 million. So it's a 2 million round on an 8 million pre-money valuation. And that's as difficult as it is. So I would not fret about that, especially if you're applying for like anything less than the kind of Series A, Series B or less, you can do it pretty quickly. I don't know if there was another question I was supposed to answer. But I'm confused. But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, this phase though is really like a real place where you can just show your interest in like what they're actually doing. So like, and yeah, it's one of the few parts of the interview where you have complete control. Like you have complete control on what you say, and so it should be, you know, partially like, hopefully you're actually interested in the fund you're applying to. So you will have, having read them, maybe you will have some questions. So maybe, you know, the one thing that they say makes them unique, it's not necessarily clear how it works on like, and you want more information. So you maybe can ask them, you know, if you were applying to ICE, you might ask us questions about, so how does the community work? Like what type of events do you run? How do the founders actually interact? Or, you know, you could ask like pretty niche questions about the fund, but you could also ask them, you know, questions about, you know, what your life will be like, what the job will be like, what type of deals you'll be allowed to do, where do deals come from? Like all of those are like pretty valid and also like indicate an interest in working there and succeeding there, beyond the kind of, I want a job in VC and want to be paid.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Tunde, Francesca. I mean, I know we've gone over time. A couple of people have left already, so I suppose we can wrap it up here unless there are any other questions. Obviously, we'll post a recording on Slack as well. I'm also putting the link to what Francesca was talking about, which I think is the right link, Francesca, but of course, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah,
it's the Medium article.
Perfect.
So yeah.
And then we can probably share these, thanks Bella, these slides as well, because there's some links to various resources, a few slides on.
Yeah, these slides are great, so please do share them if you can.
Great.
Yeah, we'll share them.
Cool. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. Have a good evening. And I think the last session is this week, I think. But yeah, I'm sure Julia will be back for the next one. So thanks for your time, everyone.
Thank you all and good luck.
Good luck.
Bye.